Welcome to your NFL Week 14 reaction. This is the video where I give you my unfiltered thoughts about each and every game this Sunday, right after the madness, the action. And I'm here right after that epic, crazy, wild Los Angeles Rams victory over the Buffalo Bills, who were my number one rated team in the NFL. And we're going to talk about what happened to the Bills in this game, why the Rams were able to upset them, and if this means the Rams are back. Can they win the NFC West? They have a huge showdown on Thursday night against, all of a sudden, a pretty decent-looking 49ers team. But man, this was a wild day. Personally, a tough day for me betting. I'm not going to lie. I hope it went well for the picks. I haven't tallied it up, but I feel like most of the teams I felt would win. The results were just a little bit different than I would have expected. Maybe one or two upsets, but nothing crazy, right? So let's get to the first part of the recap before I go watch Sunday Night Football, and I'll be back here for the Sunday Night Football recap of the Chargers and the Chiefs. Let's begin with that Rams-Bills game because there's a lot to say about this game. And the first thing I want to say is Sean McDermott. I thought we were over this, or I at least thought we were close to being over this. There's no question. Sean McDermott got absolutely outcoached in this game. And Sean McCabo, which is what I've been calling him lately because it feels like he's taken a vacation to Cabo lately, he turned back into Sean McVay. He turned back into Boy Wonder. And he got a little help from Matthew Stafford, playing one of the best games I've ever seen in his entire career, even with the Rams. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, the Rams offense went absolutely nuclear in a performance that I don't think we've seen all season. It was unique in how they dominated this game. We'll get more into that in a second. 44-42, the Rams win. Despite Josh Allen having 6 touchdowns. 6. And much of the Bills' offense coming from Josh Allen, period. Whether it be tight window throws, ridiculous scrambles, off-scheduled plays. A lot of the offense was simply number 17, which is why I believe he's the MVP. Right there with Saquon Barkley. We'll give a shout out to our other guy from the 2018 NFL draft, Saquon Barkley, but this is why Josh is the MVP. It's kind of crazy to say after a loss, but the fact that he can lose a game scoring 42 points, having 6 touchdowns, and this is the type of effort that Allen can put forth and they can lose, is exactly why he's the most valuable player. You couple that with the fact that they've mostly won more than they've lost. They've scored 30 points, I think, 8 out of 9 games, 7 out of the last 8 games. They've won. They were on a long winning streak. Now they dropped to, I think, 10-3 on the season, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong. The Rams do advance to 7-6 on the season. And all of a sudden with this win, it puts them right in the conversation for the NFC West. And I don't think it's too outlandish to suggest or put them as the favorite for the division. And we'll discuss that as well. There's just so much to discuss in this game. I think the play of the game was the punt block for a touchdown for the Rams, which happened right before the end of the first half. That punt block put the Rams up early in the game 17-7, which allowed the Rams to dictate the pace of the game and to play balanced on offense and to do what they wanted with their play calling. It also forced the Bills in a chasing mode, which I think also enabled Josh Allen to become Superman in this game and put up those stats that we know that he can. But I feel like for a large majority of the season, because the Bills have dominated to such a thorough degree on offense, on defense, altogether, turnovers, all that, Allen really hasn't had to put up those type of stats. A lot of the games, I mean, some of them he has, but not all the time because he's kind of been handing it off. They've been playing good defense. They're still managing 30 points because, you know, he's doing enough to win. He's making enough explosives, but he's not having to go out of his way to make insane runs, things like that, right? That punt block gives the Rams the win, right? Because the game was a 2-point game at the end of the day. Without that punt block, they don't win this game, in my opinion. The other big headline that I want to take away before we get into all the individuals and everything in the stats is at the end of the game, the Bills drove down to make it a 2-point game. And it was aided by a big pass interference to Khalil Shakir, which was clearly a pass interference. It wasn't a great penalty to take by the Rams, but it probably would have been a completed pass if the guy didn't get in the way. And that set them up inside the 20. They score a touchdown. But one thing is, they try a quarterback sneak on 1st and goal, and it gets stuffed. Sean McDermott at that point calls a timeout. I would love to have lived in a world where Sean McDermott did not take a timeout. First of all, I would have loved to have lived in a world where they would have thrown the ball on 1st and goal to see if they could score without running it to run the clock. But second, Sean McDermott, you cannot call a timeout in that scenario. You have all 3 of your timeouts. You never want the game to come down to an onside kick, because onside kicks 9 times out of 10, it's pretty much 9 times out of 10. The percentage might actually be worse. It might be more like 93 times out of 100. It is recovered by the receiving team. The team that kicks it almost never receives the football. And I just scream at the television. I was live for this game. Please, NFL coaches, play Madden just one time. I was just going through the whole clock management situations the whole time, and I was talking through it, as I love to do on the broadcast, and I'm hearing at the same time Tom Brady suggest the same sort of things and the same sort of scenario. I thought actually Josh was impeccable in the 2-minute situation. I thought he played it perfectly, almost to perfection in terms of keeping the time on the clock, not using timeouts, not taking cheap completions that don't move you anywhere and only waste time. I thought Josh did an incredible job at only taking explosive plays. That's exactly what you have to do when you're managing the game in that situation. Josh played that amazingly, which has shown such a growth in his game, in my opinion. But for McDermott to take that timeout completely undermined everything that Josh did on that drive, that his team did. Because if you keep those 3 timeouts with about a minute left, you have a chance to kick the ball deep, or maybe even kick an onside if you really want to. But you could kick the ball deep, call 3 timeouts, or at least force the Rams to have to get a first down by running the ball 3 times. Or maybe they run the ball twice and throw it once and it's incomplete, and you get the ball back with a timeout with Josh Allen, and all you need is a field goal in a dome. So when you think about that clock management situation, amazingly played by Josh Allen, amazingly played by the Bills offense, incredibly poorly played by Sean McDermott at the end of the game. It's 44-42. First of all, don't call the quarterback sneak. If you're going to call the quarterback sneak and you don't get it, just hurry to the line. Don't call a timeout. Hurry to the line and try to score the second time. I'd rather give up the 15 seconds it takes to recalibrate and run the ball in than take a timeout, because that costs you the opportunity of calling 3 straight timeouts and getting the ball back and having Josh Allen drive into field goal range and winning the game with a field goal, because you're almost never going to get an onside kick. When the game comes down to an onside kick, the game is over. That's my personal opinion. Okay? So that is a situation that I thought was incredibly poorly played by Buffalo, and I wanted to talk through that. But the reason the Rams won this game is because they were 11 for 15 on 3rd down. And one of the 3rd downs, I believe, was at the end of the game when they punted the ball, or they just ended the game. So it was really 11 for 14. That is one of the most outrageous offensive 3rd down performances I've ever seen. Stafford was nails. The way that he was reading the field, his throws on 3rd down, whether to the perimeter or the middle of the field, the way he was manipulating zone coverage, Cooper Kupp's catches, just Velcro hands, Puka Nacua making just circus-like toe taps, circus-like dives, like incredible catches. They were 1 for 1 on 4th down. So if you combine 3rd and 4th down, they're 12 for 16. And Mcvay took McDermott to school. There's no denying that. 28 first downs to 25 for the Rams. And really, the game felt like the Rams were piecing together and, just matriculating the ball downfield each and every drive. It's first down after first down after first down, 3rd down conversion after 3rd down conversion, high leverage situation after high leverage situation. If they played this game 10 times. The Rams probably, on average, convert 7 out of 15 third downs. Like, that just doesn't happen. It was peak Rams. It was peak Stafford. It was peak Kupp. It was peak Nacua. The O-line was great. Kyren was very good. Like, the Rams just played a peak offensive performance. From the play calling to the adjustments at the line from Stafford to the ball that he threw each and every time to the, audible to a screen or the play call, whatever it may be, to Nacua at the end. Like, all the different sequencing, just unbelievable. The toe tap catches by Nacua, the unbelievable grabs by Demarcus Robinson or by Tutu Atwell where he's separating by 5 yards and getting open. I mean, there were plays where guys were open. There were plays where it was easy to make the throw and make the catch. There were certainly plays like that, but most of those, in my opinion, came on first and second down. A lot of the most difficult high leverage scenarios on third and fourth down for the Rams were very difficult to make, and they made almost every single one. It was like every single time. It's like, it's a ridiculous catch. It's a ridiculous throw. It's a ridiculous catch. It's a ridiculous throw. It's like every single time, and that's just peak performance. Like, I don't think the Rams are ever going to play this good for the rest of the year on offense, and I don't think the Bills are ever going to play this bad on defense for the rest of the year. It's just one of those games where it's like everything comes together for one side on that side of the ball. That being said, the Bills deserve blame for how they were prepared for this game, their inability to stop the run early in the game, their inability to get pressure throughout the game, their inability to play, coverage against Nacua and Kupp. And, if you would have told me the Bills scored 42 points against this sluggish Rams defense, I would have not been shocked. But to hear that the Rams scored 44 is what's shocking to me, right? And that's just a peak Stafford, McVay, Kupp, Nacua performance. That's all I really got. I mean, the possession was 38 minutes to 21, and the guy on the other side still managed to score 6 touchdowns and put up 445 yards. And the Bills only ran for 103 yards, and I want to say 70 or 80 of them were from Josh himself. So if you look at the total yards in the game, 445, I think 400 were Josh by himself. So, I mean, it was really just, again, Superman taking on what was a more calibrated team effort, and I think the Rams totally deserved this win. But I do think it came down to the punt block. It came down to poor clock management from McDermott from stealing an opportunity from his all-star quarterback. I think it came down to, there was a lot of penalties in this game, both sides. It came down to incredible third down efficiency, which is just not repeatable. And it came down to incredible Matthew Stafford, 23 for 30, 322 touchdowns. Kyren was, slow but steady, 87 yards on 29 attempts for 2 touchdowns. They did shut down the run in the second half. It was a lot more about Stafford in the second half. Nacua was unbelievable. 12 catches on 14 targets, got hurt in the game, came back to the game, had 162 yards and a touchdown. Cooper Kupp was really good in the game. Robinson and Atwell did their part in the game. It was unbelievable from the Rams. This was an unbelievable game, a great watch. Did it suck for me personally? Yes, because I bet on the Bills. I lost money on the Bills. Lost more money than I'd like to admit, but it is what it is. It happens. Sometimes a team just plays an unbelievable freaking football game, and you just have to tip your hat and say, like, it is what it is. It happens. I mean, does this mean the Bills are not contenders anymore? No, it absolutely does not mean that. Does this mean that the Rams are kind of feisty and interesting for the NFC West? I would say yes, that means something to me. Am I concerned about the Bills' defense when it comes to playing upper echelon teams in the playoffs? To a certain degree, but when you really look at the landscape of the NFL right now and you look at the teams that are going to be contending with Buffalo, how many of those teams could put together this performance? When you're talking about a quarterback that's a veteran, that's this good in the pocket, this good and this precise, this ability to throw big time throws, this ability to throw tight window throws. There's not many Staffords in the NFL right now. I mean, how many of these quarterbacks could really put this performance up? Individually, I mean, maybe Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, maybe Mahomes, right? Like, I don't even think Lamar could put forth this effort. Like, how many quarterbacks in the league could put forth this effort? You look across maybe 1 out of, or like 2 out of 10 on Baker, maybe like 2 out of 10 Baker. Like maybe Miami could put forth a similar approach. there's like a list of 5 teams, and some of them won't even make the playoffs or even face the Bills. Like, you don't even have to really worry about it. Now, the Rams, like, they just had a unique thing because McVay can be this good of a play caller. Stafford can be this good of a quarterback. He's a Hall of Famer for a reason. Nacua can be unstoppable, which he was. And Kupp can make those clutch plays, and Kyron can grind those yards, and they've got a good running scheme. It's just a very well-built matchup in this game, the way this game in particular matched up and played out. I don't think Buffalo, if they're playing Pittsburgh, I don't think Pittsburgh could put together this game. Not the way they play, right? Kansas City right now. Could Kansas City even do this? Probably not. Not the way they play right now, right? Like, the Ravens, maybe they could do it in a different way if they ran the ball a lot. But this was more about Stafford. This was more about Nacua, right? Like, Lamar, as good as he is, he's not this incredible drop back passer that just slices you every play. I mean, you look at the AFC landscape, the way the Texans are blocking people, it's probably not going to happen. So for me, it's just not a repeatable performance. The Bengals are not in the playoffs. That's maybe the only team, and they're not even near the playoffs. The Rams, this gives them an opportunity, though, in the NFC West. You look at how things set up for them, and they've got an absolutely ginormous game against the 49ers. And the 49ers are extremely beat up, but they look like they have life now after a huge victory over the Bears, which I want to get to here. But the Rams, they play at San Francisco on a Thursday night. They've got a game at the Jets, I think, which should be a win, but the Jets actually played well today. We'll talk about that. They play Arizona and Seattle. So they've got 3 divisional games coming up. This win against Buffalo was huge, absolutely huge. They're 7-6. They've got 4 games remaining. If they can go 2-2, they've got a chance. Now, it depends on where those games come, in terms of wins and losses, right? It would actually be more beneficial to lose likely to the Niners and the Jets than it is to the Cardinals and the Seahawks. But I think this sets the Rams up likely to get to 10-7. Honestly. But we'll see how it happens. And honestly, I would favor the Rams to win this division because they've beat Seattle, which is big. We'll see if the Niners are healthy enough on a Thursday. I think the Niners might beat the Rams, but will that really matter? I don't know. So we'll see. It's interesting. That was a huge win for the Rams. Absolutely ginormous. So let's get to the rest of the afternoon slate before I go watch Sunday Night Football. 38-13 49ers destroyed the Chicago Bears. This was such an ass kicking that at halftime, the Bears had -3 passing yards, 7 total yards, I believe. The Niners had 300 plus yards. They beat the utter shit out of the Chicago Bears. Okay, and the stats at the end of the day probably don't even do it justice. The Niners, 452 total yards. The Bears, 162. They managed to score 2 touchdowns. They failed on a 2-point conversion later in the game. The Niners whooped the Bears' ass. And this is a Bears team that since implementing Thomas Brown has been a much more competitive offense, a much better team. I mean, they should have beat the Packers. They could have beaten the Lions. You look at how the Bears have performed lately, and this performance really makes no sense. I mean, yeah, it was on the road, and they're not a very good road team, but they just played the Lions on the road, and they nearly won that game, right? That was the reason Eberflus got fired, because he messed up the late clock management, right? They barely lost to Minnesota in overtime, 30-27. This was a beat-up Niners team. They didn't have Trent Williams. They don't have Nick Bosa. They don't have Brandon Ayuk. They don't have Christian McCaffrey. Purdy got hurt in the game, came back. Isaac Guerrero got hurt in the game. Dre Greenlaw still out. Corners injured. Like, the Niners have nobody. All of a sudden, they go nuclear. They're not stopped in the red zone. They get 2 fourth downs. They're 50% on third down. Brock Purdy was best game in a long time. 20 for 25, 325, and 2 touchdowns against one of the better pass defenses everybody says in the NFL. Purdy absolutely annihilated them. Jawan Jennings annihilated them. 7 catches, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns. Debo actually had a couple plays in the game. Kittle was a monster, a man among boys. He had 100+ yards. He was incredible. Kyle Shanahan was insane in this game. They had 7 sacks on Caleb Williams in the game. Their defensive line, Leonard Floyd, Yetur Gross-Matos, Malik Collins was sensational. They forced 6 punts. I mean, they just absolutely annihilated them. It wasn't even a contest, and it's shocking, right? Like the Niners, if you would have said this would have happened with more of their healthy players in week 6, you would have been like, okay, that makes sense. Week 14, the way that they've been playing, the way that they've been looking against the Bills and against the Packers, and I understand, like, we talked about it on our pick show. Like, I picked the Niners, and I was not bold enough to lay the points with the Niners, and I shouldn't have made that mistake. I was talked out of it, to be honest, because I just was not bold enough in my claim here for a bounce back, but with all the injuries, right? But to me, like, this opens my eyes for the Niners in being like, did they figure something out a little bit? Did they get back to the drawing board a little bit and figure some things out? Especially offensively. It felt like they did. It felt like their running game got better. It felt like their screen game was much better. It felt like everything they wanted on offense worked. I mean, and their defense just capitalized off that, and they jumped on it. And if they're able to get Nick back, if they're able to get Greenlaw back, they did get Hufanga back in this game, so that did help, seemingly. But 38-13, that's an impressive performance. Now, all of a sudden, the Niners are not out of this, right? Because they're 6-7. The Bears are now 4-9. And if the Niners win against the Rams, both those teams are 7-7. If the Niners beat the Rams, all of a sudden we're talking, right? Because the Rams, like we talked about, they've got probably the best chance to win the division. But the Niners, is it possible? It is possible. They could beat the Rams. They play Miami. That's an interesting game. They play Detroit at home on Sunday night. And they've got the Cardinals. So if they can win their divisional games, that's obviously huge. That's 2 wins. They'd be 8 wins on the year. If they can manage to beat one of the Dolphins or the Lions, that would make them 9-8. It's very possible. It's very possible. So, yeah, that is a crazy performance. I mean, Kittle, Guerendo, Jennings. Hopefully Guerendo's okay. Again, another injury for the Niners. I mean, they just keep getting injured, but they're still in this thing. They're still fighting. So incredibly impressive from my perspective, just because I did not expect this 25-point victory with all the injuries they have. Despite being at home, it was impeccable. And from the Bears' perspective, I wonder if Matt Eberflus was watching this, because this was a disgusting performance from Caleb Williams, a disgustingly poorly coached game. They could not run the ball in San Francisco whatsoever. They had 2.7 yards per carry. They could not block on third down. Caleb, once again, was holding on the ball way too long. And what else? I mean, their receivers, DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, did nothing until the second half. Rome Odunze put up 2 touchdowns when it was a little too late. The defense got absolutely shredded. So, wow. Also, wow, Seattle beating the Cardinals by 12, 30-18. Impressive. The Cardinals felt like, early in this game, it felt like they kind of like were like gonna win this game. I mean, they went up 7-0 almost immediately. First drive of the game, Wilson scores a touchdown. You're like, okay, here's the Cardinals. Right, this is the Cardinals team we've been watching. All of a sudden, the Seahawks score 17 in the first quarter. So they're in control for the entirety of the game, up 17-7. And just the flaws of the Cardinals continue to show. Kyler and the drop-back passing game being inconsistent. Way too many checkdowns, not enough explosives through the air. Run game was fine from Connor, but some of it came later in the game when it didn't matter as much that they were running the ball. especially on the last drive where Connor kind of got it going. I just felt like there was, again, so misplaced on offense, lack of rhythm. And it was not like the Seahawks really moved the ball like amazingly well, but they did enough, especially early. I thought Jackson Smith-Njigba was really, really good in this game. He had 5 catches, 82 yards, and a touchdown. Geno didn't turn it over, and he was very efficient, 24 for 30, 233, and a touchdown. Charbonnet, I thought, was fantastic. He had 134 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground, which was the best rushing day I've seen against the Cardinals in weeks. Best running game for the Seahawks in weeks. And he was also catching the ball really well as well. And you wonder, even with Kenneth Walker back, if they'll give the ball to Charbonnet a little bit more for that efficiency. Seahawks outrushed them 176 to 121. They were better on third down, 7 for 15 compared to 4 for 12. They did have less first downs, but they did have more yards, 409 to 356. Seattle also had 2 sacks. Leonard Williams, again, was a stud. Seattle also had 9 penalties. They also had more time of possession by 7 minutes, 33 to 26. There were a couple big special teams plays, if I'm not mistaken. There was not a sprinkle of DK Metcalf, but like not an outrageous amount. And most of this game was just like Kyler did turn it over a couple times early, which was huge. That is kind of one of the areas. First half, couple interceptions, set up the Seahawks with some short fields. Maybe that's what I'm thinking about with the special teams plays. But it felt like Seattle had a couple short fields. They were able to capitalize on a couple explosive plays. I thought Seattle's offensive line also protected well. And I think the problem was for Arizona that they couldn't get a 4-man rush on Seattle. And they had the blitz, and that kind of allowed Jackson Smith-Njigba, usually him, to win his one-on-one and convert for a big play. They hit them with a couple screens. It was a well-calibrated plan for the Cardinals. It was a very good counterpunch for what the Cardinals were bringing in that first matchup that gave Seattle problems. But Seattle matches up really well with Arizona. That's just the case. We've seen it once, we've seen it twice. And Arizona's now on the ropes in their division because, yeah, they have an easier schedule than Seattle, but they're 6-7 now. They've dropped what? They pretty much feel like they're lost because they've dropped 3 in a row to Minnesota, Seattle, and Seattle again. They play a New England team coming off a bye with a stud of a quarterback, my guy Drake May. That will not be an easy game, in my opinion. They should win, but I don't think it's easy. Carolina in Carolina is not easy the way Carolina is playing. I might actually pick Carolina. They play the Rams and they play the Niners. So I think they're kind of falling back into the team that we expected them to be before the year. A 7-6 type of win team that is kind of feisty. They can upset you. They're well coached. Kyler can make plays, but they're not exactly a playoff type of team. Seattle, on the other hand, they're 8-5 all of a sudden. But you watch them and they feel just very inconsistent. Offensively, they're kind of meh. Defensively, they're very solid. I think their defense has been playing fantastic. I think they're a top 10 defense in football. They're going to really get tested, though. They play at home against Green Bay and Minnesota. They go at Chicago, which is apparently way more tough than playing, against Chicago on the road. And then they play at the Rams. So 3 of those teams I would consider to be better than Seattle, probably. Green Bay, Minnesota, and the Rams. So this division's going to come back. It's going to come down to the last game of the year. It really is. I mean, that's what it feels like. So Seattle is 8-5. Impressive win. Huge win for them in the division. 30-18. They take care of business. They got enough plays at the end to secure the victory. They did enough early on defense. They made the key turnovers. They didn't turn it over themselves. And, no sacks for Arizona is huge. Arizona's been terrorizing teams with their blitzes. Even the Vikings. The Vikings had problems. I think they sacked Darnold like 5 times. And they still, Seattle was not, that was huge. Seattle O-line and D-line plays well, they can win a game. Geno's protected, he doesn't turn it over. Who would have thought? Me, of course. Geno's good when you give him time, but the problem is Seattle does not usually have that much time. So those are the afternoon games, guys. I'm going to go eat some food. I'm going to go watch Sunday Night Football, enjoy Chargers-Chiefs. Hopefully the Chargers pull off the upset. We'll see. But yeah, it should be fun. I'll be back and I'll review that game and then get to the games that happened earlier in the day. Thanks for watching so far. Gronk spike the like button if you haven't already. The Kansas City Chiefs said, "How have we not won a game so far this season? A snap to a grounder through the legs of our quarterback? A blocked field goal? Ref inclusion? How about we go up 13-0, we blow the lead, we look like we're going to lose, but really we're never going to lose. And then on the game-winning drive, we boink the field goal, doink right off the left upright, and instead of going out, it goes in. Nicholas Gill and everybody in Chicago sighs. The Kansas City Chiefs do it again. Another one-score victory over the Los Angeles Chargers, 19-17. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, officially the luckiest team in NFL history. And there's just no debating it. You can love it, you can hate it, but there's no debating that the Chiefs find ways to be flukier and luckier each and every week. And it's just comedy. I'm literally laughing watching the ball hit the upright and go through for the field goal, man. I'm literally laughing, okay? The Chiefs win 19-17, and this was a bit of a tale of two halves, in all honesty. I thought the Chiefs were far superior in the first half. I thought they had very much the control of the game offensively, defensively. I thought that the only area they really struggled was in the red zone offensively. Otherwise, I felt they were the much better team. Maybe the Chargers had a couple plays they could have connected on in the first half that would have turned the tide of the game, as every game has, But Kansas City, I thought, was the far better team early in the game. And then in the second half, a switch flipped for the Chargers, right? They got a little jolt of lightning. And I think they just did exactly what Jim Harbaugh wants to be. And that's physical. They were aggressive. They ran the football. They rushed the quarterback. They got off the field on third down, and they made a little bit of a comeback. They, I think, had 2 consecutive touchdown drives. One to Gus Edwards, 3-yard touchdown. One to Quentin Johnston, where Herbert buys time, pump fake, throws it in the back of the end zone. And Herbert was having a really tough first half. They couldn't really separate. They were throwing the ball a ton, and they couldn't really make, those plays from their receivers. Just out of reach on a bomb for Josh Palmer. Just a little bit too far on a couple of connections. Guys wide open, but then there's a deflected pass on third down. Just little subtleties that may have determined this game early on. But once the game went on, Herbert and this offense began to open up, and the Chiefs' defense began to open up as well. I was going to say fall apart, but I don't think that's exactly the right terminology. I just think the Chargers found a little bit more of a running game, which allowed them to keep the Chiefs honest. It allowed third downs to be a little bit more manageable. Herbert was very good navigating the pocket, and he was able to make some just big boy throws. Big boy throws to Quentin Johnston, big boy throws especially to Josh Palmer, who had a phenomenal second half. Big boy throws to Stone Samart, who I tweeted during the middle of the game, if Justin Herbert wins this football game with a man named Stone Smart catching the football, I will buy his jersey live on air. So I was prepared to buy a Justin Herbert jersey as I continued this recording. But unfortunately, not even the great Stone Smart could outdo the voodoo of the Kansas City Chiefs, the magic of the Kansas City Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes, meanwhile, 24 for 37, 210, and a touchdown. Statistically, not too impressive. He had a couple scrambles. I thought he made some nice plays in some big moments. There was one third down where I thought he navigated the pocket extremely well. It was a crosser in front of his face. The typical man coverage from the opposing team where Kansas City runs mesh, right? They have a guy over the ball. They have 2 guys underneath. And they use the speed of Worthy to come across the face of Mahomes. Mahomes, he just moves to the right, shuffles, moves to the left. Actually, he was throwing across the field. It was a really nice touch ball, got them a first down. I thought that was one of his more impressive plays. He made a couple nice scrambles. Obviously, the sealer which was the field goal. But right before the field goal, the little scramble drill play where they PA boot from under center. He rolls to the right. He's outside the pocket. He buys time. He avoids a tackler. He hits Kelce wide open. I don't know why teams continue to allow Travis Kelce on the biggest play of the game to be wide open like that, but that's exactly what happened, and Mahomes was able to make that happen, and that was one of his best plays of the day. I thought there was a couple nice throws down the field, but mostly, a lot of dump-offs, a lot of running the football. D-Hop scored a touchdown early in the game, and Mahomes pretty much did the same thing Mahomes has been doing all season. He managed the game. And I thought that the clock management at the end, that last drive, was superb by Kansas City. They did everything they needed to. I actually thought the Chargers did a decent job of kind of setting themselves up for success in that situation in terms of the timeouts taken by Harbaugh. But I felt like ultimately it just wasn't, they just couldn't make that play on third down, which they needed to, which was interesting because on that play, I think it was right after the 2-minute warning, if they get a stop there and the Chiefs are passing it, it probably would have been a sack. But if, let's say, Mahomes throws the ball and he's incomplete for some reason, that would have given the Chargers about 150 left in the game with no timeouts, down by only 2, needing a field goal to win. So I thought that Harbaugh kind of set his team up with a chance to win. They just couldn't make that, ultimately, that stop on 3rd and 7. Otherwise, Pacheco, he was okay. 14 carries, 55 yards. He made some nice runs in the end. Kareem Hunt wasn't as involved in this game. Noah Gray wasn't as involved in this game. This was a heavy Worthy game. There's a little bit of D-Hop. There was a little bit of Kelce. A lot of the running backs. A little bit of P. Ryan mixed in there. But ultimately, not a little bit of Juju. Nobody really had a massive game from the Chiefs receiving-wise. I want to say Worthy was one of the more impressive elements, which is something I haven't said much of the season. The Chiefs were once again 8 for 15 on third down. The Chargers were 6 for 13, so not too bad. 1 for 1 on fourth as well. Rushing yards was relatively even. Passing yards was relatively even. Total yards was relatively even. But like I said, it was mostly a tale of two halves. The Chargers punted only one more time than Kansas City. The Chiefs took 8 penalties for 98 yards, 7 penalties for 50 for the Chargers. I would say Jawan Taylor, is somebody going to call him on a false start eventually? Is somebody going to call him on a false start? Because at this point, it's getting ridiculous. I mean, almost every play of the game is a false start by number 74. Somebody has to call false start eventually. Bill Vinovich, I just hate that ref. I don't know why. I just hate this guy. 30 minutes of possession for the Chargers. They actually had that edge in the game thanks to their long drives in the second half. This was the typical Chiefs game. Low scoring, time of possession, third downs, a lot of plays, long drives. That's kind of how it was. Clock management. Not a lot else to really be said here, honestly. The defensive front of Kansas City was solid. Not overwhelming, but solid. Maybe a little bit better than the past couple of games. Their secondary obviously looked better because they were facing a very underwhelming receiving core made up of Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer, and DJ Chark, and Stone Smart. Will Dissly was out of this game relatively early. Ladd McConkey did not play. J.K. Dobbins did not play. So the Chargers were extremely undermanned in this game. Definitely, if they would have had Ladd McConkey in this game might have went a little bit differently. I honestly feel like the Chargers might have won this game, especially just early on to have a couple more conversions on third down, a couple more key first downs from their passing game. They tried to lean into the passing game early, as that does typically be the strategy for teams to attack the Chiefs defense because they're weaker against the pass this year than they are the run. It's kind of strange to say, but that's the case. And it wasn't really working, so they had to become more balanced in the second half, and that worked a little bit better. But, yeah, same old, same old. Chiefs are 12-1 now. Chargers are 8-5, I believe. The Chiefs retain and remain in the lead. for the number 1 seed in the AFC. The Bills' loss really, really helps Kansas City because now they can drop, 2 games? They can drop a game, I should say, and they'll still be in the number 1 seed. But if they drop 2 games and the Bills sweep, the Bills still have to play Detroit next week, by the way, then the Chiefs would still, the Chiefs would have to drop 2 for the Bills to take it. Now, the Steelers are also a threat for the number 1 seed, but the Steelers do have a very tough schedule, including the Eagles, the Ravens, and the Chiefs in a row. Now, the thing there is that the Steelers do have a chance to beat the Chiefs. So that kind of opens the door for Pittsburgh as well. Anything that I really came to mind, I do have to say, now after watching that game on Sunday Night Football, what a stark difference between the Bills and Rams and the Chiefs and Chargers. 2 totally differently played football games, which is pretty crazy to watch back to back, right? An offensive shootout and a defensive battle, war. And then, I was just checking social media, and you see that Josh Allen has set records for fantasy points. He set records for touchdowns, all this sort of stuff, and they still lose the game, 450 yards or whatever it was. It's pretty miraculous. It's pretty crazy, but Josh Allen set a fantasy football record, which is pretty insane. Most fantasy points in a game or something like that. So that's wild. Congratulations to Josh Allen, I guess, even though it was a loss. All right, let's move on from Sunday Night Football. And let's get to the earlier action. Might as well talk about Pittsburgh because, we go from Buffalo to Kansas City to Pittsburgh. Gronk spiked the like button, guys. Also, if you want to check out my content, Monday morning, I'm always live on Bleacher Report every Monday at 11 a.m. If you guys haven't already downloaded the BR app, download that app, man. Check me out on Bleacher Report every Monday morning at 11 a.m. I also post a video later on Mondays to put it on YouTube. 27-14, Pittsburgh wins by 13 over the Browns. This, in my opinion, watching the game, was fairly misleading because I thought Cleveland was much better than the score indicated. I do think the Steelers should have won this game, but I definitely feel this should have been a 1-score win. So this was a bit misleading because Pittsburgh largely benefited from short fields, turnovers, and missed field goals. So let's just say the Browns kicked 2 field goals. The score is ultimately 27-21, which to me feels more like what the game really was. Now, Pittsburgh comes through with the win. They beat the 3-10 Cleveland Browns and advanced to 10-3. This game was decent early on. It was actually 7-3 Cleveland at the end of the first, and Pittsburgh started a bit slow. I think their opening field goal came off of a turnover by the Browns, very early in the game. So let me just check the total turnovers. So Cleveland had 1 fumble lost and 2 interceptions. And if I'm not mistaken, one or both of the interceptions were pretty wacky. Not typical Jameis interceptions. One of them was a defensive tackle intercepting a pass, and then the other one was a dropped pass into an interception or a deflected pass into an interception. So actually, this wasn't one of Jameis's kind of games where he just throws it straight to the other team. It was a little bit different. It was a little bit more kind of wacky. But going through the box score, Cleveland had 5 more first downs, 20-15. Pittsburgh's offense kind of struggled in this game. Cleveland was very bad on 3rd down, 2 for 13, and that's largely where their troubles stemmed from a turnover standpoint and from, them not resulting in touchdowns, having to resort to field goals, which end up missing, right? Cleveland 2 for 13 on 3rd down. Pittsburgh 6 for 14, which is a lot where you want to be. 3 for 4 on fourth, though, for Cleveland. 104 rushing yards for Cleveland, 120 for Pittsburgh. Felt like Pittsburgh was the better team in that area, although the stats don't really indicate that as much. Najee kind of struggled. He had 16 for 53, 3.3 yards per carry, 1 touchdown. I thought Warren ran hard when he got his opportunities, and Patterson was also pretty involved later in the game. Only 156 passing yards for Cleveland, while 147 for the Steelers. Cleveland also had more yards in the game. Pittsburgh had more sacks, 3-1. Cleveland did have the turnovers, and Pittsburgh actually punted more, 6-5. Cleveland also had more penalties, 9-6. So a lot of mistakes from the Browns, which is kind of what you would expect from a bad football team that has talent and can be competitive, but overall, they're just a bad football team. And regardless of quarterback, they've kind of proven that to us. They make too many mistakes. They miss field goals. They turn it over. They beat themselves. And that was ultimately the case for me in this game. I didn't feel like the Steelers were overwhelming on offense in any way, shape, or form. They had 267 total yards. They didn't throw for 150 passing yards. I felt like this was kind of a game where Cleveland handed them the game. Early on, it could have been pretty interesting if Cleveland connects on their field goals, but they didn't. And I don't really know what Cleveland's doing. Like, I don't know why they continue to employ Dustin Hopkins. He's an awful kicker. Like, I have no idea. He's the worst kicker in the league. Like, I really don't understand why they continue to employ this guy. Pat Freiermuth had a touchdown. Otherwise, no George Pickens, not a lot of receiving production. You know, a couple catches from Jalen Warren, couple catches from Miller, couple catches from Mike Williams. But Van Jefferson also had another touchdown. I thought some of the designs, especially on the touchdowns, were pretty nice by Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson being able to execute. One thing I've noticed is their screen game and their play action boot game in certain instances is exceptional. And Arthur Smith really uses Russell Wilson's kind of creativity and quick release to enable them to convert in those scenarios. Jameis had another 41 attempts, which isn't ideal, you know. But that's kind of like the story of the game for me, man, is just I thought this game had a real chance to be good, and Cleveland just coughed it up. I actually want to look a little bit deeper at some of the special teams here, because it felt like the Steelers had some really advantageous field position. They had some good returns in this game. Just going to check the team stats here. Can we get return stats? Pittsburgh also had more drives, 14-12. Yeah, 27-14, man. So a lot of people are just going to continue to say that I hate on the Steelers, but this is just my honest take from watching them play. Like, I don't really understand why people say I hate the Steelers. I just look at what happens and I kind of tell you what I think happened. And that's how I judge these teams. Cameron Hayward had 2 sacks. Yeah, so they had some good returns on the interceptions. That's probably what I'm thinking about. Austin had fine returns. They didn't have any kick returns. Ford had a good return. Tony was the punt returner. I remember one pretty nice return. And then Hopkins had the 2 missed field goals. And a big advantage for Pittsburghers right now is their kicker. I mean, Chris Boswell makes 50-yarders like regularly in Pittsburgh, and a lot of kickers struggle to kick in Pittsburgh. That's a huge advantage for them, especially at home. So yeah, like I said, mistakes by Cleveland, capitalize on Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh just played a mistake-free football game for the most part. They ran the ball. They stayed balanced. Warren was efficient. Najee not so much, grinding it away. Russ didn't make many mistakes. He capitalized on the advantages that he had. Pittsburgh's defense played well. They got some pressure on Jameis, forced some mistakes. They were in the right passing lanes at the right time. And there was missed field goals and made field goals. Pretty much the story of the game, honestly. Just another one of those Pittsburgh games. So to me, good win by Pittsburgh. they beat Cleveland after losing to Cleveland the first time. Just like not extremely impressive because it felt like Cleveland kind of lost more than Pittsburgh really like dominated, so to speak. But it's a win nonetheless, and it puts the Steelers pretty much exactly, where I have them. It doesn't really change my opinion on them. For Cleveland, it kind of really doesn't change my opinion on them either. Would I have liked them to have made this a one-score game? Sure. But I mean, it was bound to happen making this many mistakes that you were not going to be in a game against a good opponent. So moving on, we've got the Philadelphia Eagles and the Carolina Panthers, which I thought was one of the more disappointing efforts of the day by a football team that I think is a good team, and that's the Philadelphia Eagles. They only win by 6 against Carolina, who is also a 3-10 football team, and equally, if not worse, than Cleveland. And I think Philly kind of deserves definitely more of a deep dive and in a critical lens than the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Eagles win 22-16, right? But they easily could have lost this game. I mean, there was an opportunity late in the game for Carolina to go on a game-winning drive and win the game. Carolina had more first downs than Philadelphia. They converted 3 of 5 fourth downs, and ultimately that's what won them the game. Philadelphia was able to make a stop on fourth down at the end. Carolina was 7 for 16 on third. That's 10 conversions on third or fourth down, which is about 50% overall, which is pretty impressive for a team like Carolina against a defense that's supposed to be the best in football. Carolina ran the ball decent today. Hubbard, I thought, played really hard. He had 92 yards on 26 carries, 3.5 yards per carry, but they put up 118 as a team. Brooks also got injured in this game, something to look for. The Eagles managed to win another game with 83 total passing yards, including sacks. Jalen Hurts had 108 yards on 14 completions. He was awful for most of the game. 2 touchdowns. His stats looked decent because he had 110 passer rating, but he took a bad sack in the game. He had time all day. He couldn't really make any big time throws down the field. Again, extremely underwhelmed by Jalen Hurts. I thought Bryce Young was the better quarterback in this game. He was 19 for 34, 191, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. That's where passer rating will be misleading because he threw an interception. It makes him look like the worst quarterback. The only thing I'd say about Bryce is his interception was quite bad. He threw the ball way over the head of his receiver. He was panicked. I think he rolled out to the right, threw the ball down the field. He just totally missed on the corner route to Adam Thielen. It was intercepted. That actually allowed the Eagles to set up in good range to go down the field for another score. I will say that Bryce Young also made a very nice throw to Xavier Legette that was dropped at the 2-yard line on that game-winning drive, potential game-winning drive. That would have likely won the Panthers the game. Instead, it was dropped. So there was that. Philly got away with that. Saquon played really well, of course. He had 6.2 yards per carry, 124 yards, 20 carries. Another game that kind of proves that he's the MVP, as he had 20 carries and Jalen Hurts had 14 completions. He had more yards than they did passing on the ground. And the Eagles ended up with 209 total rushing yards, some of that coming from Jalen Hurts. Devontae Smith made an impact on his return, 4 catches for 37 and a touchdown. Adam Thielen was unguardable, 9 catches, 102 yards, and no touchdowns, but he was phenomenal in this game. I thought he converted every time they needed him to. He made a big catch after a big catch after a big catch, some insane catches, some great routes. Carolina had 4 sacks on Philly. Philly had 1, right? So some bad sacks, some holding of the ball by Jalen Hurts. I think I said they only sacked him once, but I was wrong. 4 sacks. That felt more about right. Only 2 punts by Carolina in the entire game. 4 punts by Philly. And that spoke to the time of possession. Carolina held the ball for a lot of the game. 33 minutes of possession. I just think in this game that Philly looked very vulnerable. They gave up a lot of time of possession. They had a hard time getting pressure against Bryce. They had a hard time chasing him and tracking him down and making sacks and making hits and creating pressure on him. Bryce did a great job of always avoiding the hit or avoiding a play where he was under pressure. And really, when you think about it, the Panthers don't have great receivers. I thought Thielen looked phenomenal, but otherwise, their receiving core is pretty underwhelming. Their run game was very solid. This game was won by really an interception by Bryce Young, an inability to come through in the end by the Panthers, and a great running game from Saquon. And it felt like every time the Panthers were able to score or get themselves ahead, the Eagles were able to come back with a nice drive because they were able to run the ball at will whenever they really wanted to, which is always their fallback option. So Philly wins 22-16. They were favored by 12.5, potentially 13.5, depending on where you got the bet or if you bet it. Extremely underwhelming in my opinion. Like I said, they got out first downed, outgained, outpossessed, and they very easily could have lost. I thought their defense had one of the worst games of their season so far, or at least lately. And yeah, it's only 16 points allowed, but it felt like they got shredded to a greater degree. And Vic Fangio was visually upset. So, yeah, the Eagles, 22-16. Not a lot of positives for Philadelphia, to be honest. Not a lot of positives. I'm not going to lie. Like, A.J. Brown must have been frustrated about this game. Their defensive front did not dominate in the way that they should. Like, A.J. Brown had 4 catches for 43 yards. Like, that's not good enough. So Eagles, a little bit of a wake-up call. They don't lose, but I think it's a wake-up call for them. Moving on, the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets. Dolphins win 32-26 in overtime. The Dolphins are still in the race for an AFC wildcard, depending on what takes place with the Chargers and the Broncos. Miami barely gets by against the Jets. Sorry, guys, my face is like itchy and stuff. If you haven't already, Gronk, spike the like button and subscribe. I know that some of you are not subscribed. Please subscribe. Miami dominated offensively. There's no doubt about it. They dominated. And in the way that they dominated was the exact opposite of how the Rams dominated. The Dolphins had 28 first downs, which might have been even more than the Rams had, but they were 1 for 9 on third down. This was a 2-down machine, Miami Dolphins. They would convert in the first play for a first down or the second play for a first down. They played CFL Canadian football in this game. They were also 2 for 2 on fourth down as well. Miami did not run the ball successfully with Devon Achane. He had tons of carries to prove us otherwise, and they did not. They threw the ball really, really well, especially off play action in the middle of the field, on the crossers, on the posts, some quick screens to Jonnu, things like that. But 331 passing yards for the Dolphins, only 44 rushing yards in this game, 375 total yards. They also had 3 sacks in the game on Aaron Rodgers, and they only punted 3 times. But the Jets only punted twice. The Jets did not turn it over. And the Jets actually outgained the Miami Dolphins. They were just as effective on fourth down. They ran the ball better than the Dolphins. They had about equal possession. Big difference was the Jets took 10 penalties for 83 yards, and the Dolphins took 8 for 49. This was a back-and-forth shootout. It really was. Miami scored 6 in the first quarter. Jets scored 3. Jets scored 10 in the second quarter. Dolphins scored 9. Jets scored 10 in the third quarter. They were up, had a lead. Miami responded with 11 in the fourth, and Jets had 3 in the fourth. So ultimately, it was a tie game at 26. Going into the overtime, Miami scores a touchdown. Jonnu Smith for the game winner from 10 yards out. And I thought Aaron Rodgers played really well. 27 for 39, 339 and a touchdown. I thought he got rid of the ball quick, saw the field well. I thought the play calling was well mixed. I thought that they had enough balance from Isaiah Davis and also Allen. Breece Hall was out of this game. And I thought that just basically the Jets were able to win their one-on-ones at wide receiver. Anytime they needed to play, they'd throw it short to Garrett Wilson. He'd make a guy miss. He'd make a play. Or he'd route somebody up. Anytime they needed a play, he'd throw a back shoulder or a fade ball to Devontae Adams. He'd make the play. He'd get the first down. Adams had 9 catches for 109 yards and a touchdown. Garrett Wilson, I think, had over 10 catches in this game. I'll have to double check the stats. But then you also had Waddle and Tyreek, who both had great games. Tyreek had 10 catches on 14 targets for 115 yards and a touchdown. Tua was 33 for 47 for 331 and 2 touchdowns. Again, excellent game against no Sauce Gardner, no CJ Mosley. Miami protected Tua well. Miami had a sprinkle of screen, a sprinkle of run, a sprinkle of pass downfield, but a lot of intermediate passing, especially, and some good yards after catch. But I thought this was just a good show by both quarterbacks, and they both effectively moved the ball in similar fashion. Quick passes, one-on-one matchups, Tyreek and Waddle versus Adams and Wilson. And I was impressed by the Jets more so than the Dolphins. I thought this was a pretty underwhelming effort by Miami. I expected them to dominate this game, and they didn't. And the main area I was underwhelmed was defensively. They weren't able to get stops on third down. They weren't able to make plays when they needed to. And the only reason they won was because of the offense. Waddle had 9 for 99. So, yeah, he had nearly 10 catches. Garrett Wilson had 7 for 114 on 10 targets. So, those 4 guys combined for 400 yards in the game. Not even joking. Tyreek, Waddle, Wilson, and Adams had 400 yards in the game. Everybody else, the next leading receivers were Devon Achane, running back, Braylon Allen, running back. Then Jonnu Smith, tight end, Tyler Conklin, tight end. Very similar. I mean, the offenses were extremely similar. The Jets ran the ball a tad better. Tua was just a little bit better. The play calling of Miami, just a little bit better. Just the rhythm of their offense was just a little bit better. I thought that Miami got a little bit more pressure when they needed to. Zach Sealer had 2 sacks, and Brooks had a sack as well. The Jets didn't really get that similar type of pressure. They actually did not sack Tua one time. So really underwhelming performance by Miami from a defensive perspective. We've expected much better from them lately because of how well teams have played against the Jets offensively, from their offensive perspective. But yeah, Miami at least stays alive. They have another shootout win. Their offense looks really impressive once again, but the defense is a real problem. Calais Campbell, I give him a ton of love because he was the guy motivating the defense, motivating the team to get some stops when they needed to get some stops in the fourth quarter to get the ball back for their offense. They did that. Ramsey is washed. He stinks. Their corners are slow. They can't cover man-to-man. They've got problems, And when you can block Chop Robinson in their front, you can make some plays against them. On the other side, Jets they stopped the run decent, but they didn't stop the quick passing game. They didn't stop the rhythm of Tua. They didn't get enough pressure. They didn't make them uncomfortable. It was just not good enough on that defensive side. So Miami wins in overtime, 32-26. Sanders made some huge kicks in this game. He had multiple 50-yarders before halftime and at the end of regulation, multiple 50-yarders that were huge in this game. And if not for Jason Sanders, I felt like the Dolphins would have lost this game for sure. Moving on, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beat the Raiders 28-13 in a game that the Raiders very easily could have covered, but Aiden O'Connell did get hurt later in the game, which I think, you put Desmond Ridder in there, it's kind of hard to cover when Desmond Ridder is your quarterback. But the Bucs deserved to win. They had 420 total yards. Baker was a little hit and miss. Really good early in the game. They went down the field. They scored on their first two drives. Baker was really good early in the game, and they had a touchdown to McMillan and a touchdown to Rachaad White, both passing touchdowns from Baker. Baker ended up with 3 touchdowns. He did have 2 picks, though, which was the bad part of his game. He did throw 1 to Jack Jones, I recall. 18 for 29, 295, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks, 101.9 passer rating. O'Connell, before he left, 11 for 19, 104. He did throw an interception as well. In this game, I thought that Rachaad White was the star for Tampa. They did not play Bucky Irving nearly as much as he was banged up entering this game. White was catching the ball and running the ball efficiently. 5.3 yards per carry, 17 rushes, 90 yards. This offense was looking great early in the game, and I thought Liam Cohen was on one. Their screen game was awesome. Their play action, Mike Evans was coming through early in the game with conversion after conversion, catch after catch. McMillan actually added something with 2 touchdowns, 4 catches, 59 yards. So their rookie was stepping up. Shepard made a couple plays. Irving was still in the mix, but not nearly as much as he has been in past weeks. Defensively, Levante David had a good game. The Bucs were able to get some pressure early in the game, even like just to dislodge throws and kind of make uncomfortable passes for Aiden O'Connell. But the Raiders did have 4 sacks on Baker, a lot of them coming in the second half. Bucs had 2. Bucs had 2 picks thrown. Raiders had 1. So turnovers and sacks-wise, the Raiders won those categories, which kept them in the game for a long time. But the Raiders did punt more, 4-3. The penalties was almost non-existent. 5 for Tampa for 31, 3 for 31 for the Raiders. Fumble for each team. And third down was pretty inefficient. I think the biggest thing here was Tampa was not able really to fully control the Raiders, but they do end up with a decisive victory due to a strong start and a strong finish, and because Aiden O'Connell left the game. It felt like the Raiders were getting a bit of a rhythm in the second, third quarter, where they scored 2 touchdowns, and the game was actually tied at 14 at one point, and it looked like it was going to be an either way back and forth game. But then ultimately the injury and things like that kind of caused it to go out of hand. McCormick played really well, I thought. He had 15 carries for 78 yards, 5.2 yards per carry. Michael Mayer had one of his better games, 7 for 68. Brock Bowers was very quiet. Jacoby Myers had a really nice game in this one. Anything else? Yeah, I mean, Tampa wins. Tampa's in sole position for the NFC South. It feels like they're going to win this division at this point. They're 7-6. They're probably going to get the 4 seed, maybe the 3 seed. Next week, they've got the Chargers, which could be an either-way game, 2 very, very even teams. The Falcons are still in this race, but they're not looking good. They've dropped game after game after game. We'll talk about them. So the Bucs have the Chargers. They could win that game. They play the Cowboys and the Panthers, and then the Saints. So none of these games moving forward are really intimidating. They could go 11-6, and I wouldn't be shocked. That being said, they do play their next 2 games on the road. Dallas won't be easy. The Chargers certainly will not be easy. Carolina, the way that they played Tampa the first time, is not going to be easy. And then the Saints is always tough. So they'll probably lose 1 more game at the very least. That would make them 10-7. Two losses would make them 9-8. I still think they're going to win this division, though. I really don't have anything saying that the Falcons are going to be able to overcome Tampa. So I'm happy about that because Tampa has, in my opinion, the quarterback that's playing better, the offense that's more consistent playing better. Tampa's defense is trending in the right direction lately, and it feels like they play these elite teams a lot better than the Falcons do. That is certainly the case, as the Falcons once again got shellacked by a good team in the Minnesota Vikings, 42-21. Minnesota advances to 11-2. Falcons are 6-7. Kirk Cousins, statistically speaking, 344 yards, no touchdowns. He did throw 2 picks once again. One of them was pretty early in the game. I think the other was maybe in the third quarter or so. Sam Darnold, though, was the story of the game. Not Kirk Cousins, not revenge for Kirk Cousins, but a statement by Sam. 22 for 28, 347, 5 touchdowns by Sam Darnold for a 157.9 rating. And man, this was one of the best games of the week by any player I watched. He was dealing in this game. He was making tight window throws. He was hitting crossers on the money. He was hitting outside routes. He was hitting bombs down the field. I mean, Darnold was absolutely lights out in this game. I thought this was one of the best quarterback performances, if not the best that I saw all day outside of maybe Josh and Stafford. Other than that, Darnold was freaking fantastic. Really made very few mistakes. Aaron Jones, 13 carries, 73 yards, 5.6 a clip, and a touchdown. Bijan still put up some good fantasy numbers, 92 yards and a touchdown on 4.2 per touch. Darnell Mooney, 6 for 142. Addison, 8 for 133. And not 2, but 3 touchdowns. The first touchdown was kind of a fluke. It was an underthrown bomb that Addison worked his way back to, broke a tackle, and scored. That was kind of fluky or whatever. But, nonetheless, Addison utterly dominated in the red zone as well. Now, Atlanta had more first downs than Minnesota. They would move the ball a bit, and then, of course, in classic fashion, they would turn it over, they would take a sack, things like that. Atlanta only punted once, in part because of they went for it 3 times on 4th down. They only made 1 of them. They were 7 for 13 on 3rd down. Atlanta moved the ball, but it's the classic case of playing Minnesota. You make negative plays, right? Minnesota makes negative plays. They have sacks. They have turnovers. They force you to make mistakes. They take advantage. They create big plays. Jefferson had some really nice plays. One long touchdown from Sam Darnold, one of the 5, 4 sacks by Atlanta in the game, which is still a problem for Minnesota and Sam Darnold. He takes too many sacks. But if that's the thing that's really going to hold you back, that's the thing that's going to hold you back. Atlanta also took 12 penalties for 127 yards, which is insane, while Minnesota only took 6 for 35, which is a huge difference in the game as well, offensively and defensively, setting them behind the chains, allowing the Vikings to have pass interferences, whatever it may be. And that's a common theme. When teams play in Minnesota, they seem to take a lot of penalties. Atlanta, a lot of pre-snap penalties, looking like the 49ers out there. 42-21, Minnesota. Not a lot. What else do I have to really say? I mean, Sam Darnold was superb. Cousins was not. Atlanta moved the ball but couldn't score. They had 2 field goals early. Yeah. I mean, I would have thought the game would have been closer. I did not expect the Vikings to score 42 points, but the Vikings stuck their foot. They put that foot so far on that gas pedal, they just never let off of the gas pedal in this game. They just kept going, kept scoring at the end when they wanted to and needed to. So that's my thoughts on that game. Vikings, far superior team, definitely deserved to win. That being said, Atlanta did move the ball a lot. They just continue to make a ton of mistakes. Penalties, turnovers. Cousins is a bum right now. And Sam Darnold is not. That's certainly the case. All right, we have a couple games left. Both are the lamest games of the day. I don't even really want to go into depth, but the Saints won 14-11 over the Giants. This game looked like the Saints were in control, and then they were not. Derek Carr got injured. I'm not sure how long he's going to be out. We will see, but that's obviously a huge loss. I don't think I've missed any other game so far. 14-11 Saints. Drew Lock and the Giants had a last game-winning drive opportunity they were not able to execute on. I think Lock threw a pick to close the game out at the very end. But Saints, they got the lead, and that's basically it. They weren't able to really sustain a lot of offense in the second half. The Giants were able to get a couple sacks. The Giants were able to get a little bit of pressure. The Giants were able to slow down the run. And they were getting the Saints off the field to get more and more opportunities for Locke, who threw 49 times in this game. Malik Neighbors, we weren't sure if he was going to play. He had 5 catches for 79 yards on 10 targets. Tracy and the Giants running game could not get going. And just the continued theme for the Giants is they can't block. Their offensive line is awful. There's routine plays that they can't pick up. There's routine plays that they can't block. They can't run a rollout without Drew Lock having somebody right in his face. Plays like that, things like that. Punts, 7 for the Saints, 8 for the Giants, far too many for both. Giants had 12 penalties for 112 yards. A lot of that comes from the offensive line and their secondary. Both are atrocious. Valdez-Scantling made a couple catches. Juwan Johnson made a couple catches, one of them being for a touchdown. Miller hit the end zone. Otherwise, not a lot to be said. I thought that the Saints won the game as predicted. Giants covered as somewhat predicted as well. The Giants were just able to stay in the game because the Saints really couldn't pull away at the end. And they made a couple drives to make it interesting, but they weren't able to really be a threat to win the game until the very end, where it felt like they just couldn't block well enough to make those plays down the field. And Locke, certainly not the guy that you want in that situation. And the final game is Jacksonville beating Tennessee 10-6, which is an absolute joke. Jacksonville is now 3-10 as well as Tennessee. Tennessee did pass up on a field goal in this game, relatively early. That could have helped them, I think. Calvin Ridley, Brian Thomas, both kind of inefficient but decent days. Thomas 8 catches, Ridley 7, but neither for big-time yardage. Thomas for 86, Ridley for 59. I thought that Pollard had a really good game. 21 carries for 102 yards, 4.9 yards per carry. He was breaking tackles left and right, especially in the first 2 quarters of the game. Tank Bigsby got a ton of carries, but not a lot of efficiency. Mac Jones threw 2 picks, 23 for 31. One of them was the classic Mac under pressure panic pick that he threw in the game, but he did make some throws and made some plays on third down and got some chains moving when he needed to. They did win the game. Will Levis didn't really do anything of note. 19 for 32, 168. Just not a lot of efficiency, consistency within the offense. Tennessee was pretty good on third down, 8 for 16, but they were terrible on fourth, 0 for 3. They did outrush Jacksonville. They did have about the same yards in terms of overall, but Jacksonville had more because Mac actually had 60 more yards than Will Levis. What else? 3 punts for Tennessee, 4 punts for Jacksonville. And that's about it. Not a lot of penalties. I mean, this was just like a really boring, catastrophically awful, hide your eyes type of football game. Both defenses kind of dominated. Neither team really could get anything in the red zone. Mac made mistakes, but it didn't really seem to bug him because Tennessee, of course, just can't capitalize. And it is kind of odd that Tennessee was not able to win this game, despite they were the far better team running the football, in my opinion. That is a little odd, that Tony Pollard was the engine, and they still couldn't get it done. Nothing from Nick Westbrook-Akine, which was very disappointing for fantasy purposes. Mac gets a win. So, 10-6. That's it, guys. I think I've covered every game. Monday Night Football will be the Bengals and the Cowboys. I hope you guys enjoyed this recap, my thoughts, my reaction of Week 14. The Bills fall to the Rams. Disappointing, but absolute peak performance from Stafford, LA. The Chiefs once again find a new way to win a game. The Vikings dominate Kirk Cousins. The Steelers win again. The Eagles barely beat the Panthers. The Bucs are first in the NFC South. The Seahawks are first in the NFC West. The Niners actually dominate a game. And the Dolphins beat Aaron Rodgers in overtime. Thank you guys for watching. Gronk, spike the like button and subscribe. We'll see you soon. Deuces.